Daniel had lived alone for so long that he sometimes forgot how it felt to hear another human voice inside his home. His small ranch sat far out on the open plains, where the wind carried dust across empty land and the sky stretched endlessly above him. Most mornings began the same way. He woke before the sun rose, made a simple breakfast, fed his horses, and checked the fences. His life was steady, predictable, and quiet. Too quiet. Even he knew that. But Daniel had accepted this silence. It was easier than remembering the parts of his past that still caused a dull ache in his chest. He didn't drink, didn't gamble, and didn't go to town more than once every few weeks. People knew him as the quiet cowboy who minded his own business, and he was fine with that. On one warm evening, when the sky glowed orange and the sun was sinking toward the horizon, Daniel was bringing in his horses. He noticed something unusual: 3 figures moving slowly across the distant field. His hand instantly rose to shield his eyes from the sunlight as he tried to see clearly. At first, he thought it might be travelers heading toward town. But the figures weren't moving with the speed or confidence of travelers. They looked tired, dragging their feet through the dust. As they came closer, Daniel saw the truth. It was a woman, an Apache widow, holding one child's hand, while carrying the other on her hip. Their clothes were worn, their faces dusty, and their steps shaky. The woman's shoulders trembled with exhaustion, but she kept moving forward. Her children clung to her as though she was the only strength they had left. Daniel felt his heart tighten. He wasn't used to visitors, especially not ones who looked like they had walked miles under the harsh sun. He stepped forward slowly, not wanting to alarm them. The woman's eyes lifted toward him. She looked wary for a moment, unsure if she was walking into danger or safety. When she reached the edge of his yard, the woman stopped and shifted the child on her hip. Her voice was soft, almost too weak to hear. "We only need a little rest," she said. "Just one night. I will work for food if I must. My children are tired." Daniel had heard many requests in his life, but never one spoken with such quiet dignity. She wasn't begging for money or protection, just a roof for her children, so they wouldn't sleep in the cold dirt. He nodded gently. "You can rest here tonight. Come inside." The woman hesitated, as if she couldn't believe someone would offer kindness without asking anything in return. Daniel kept his distance, so she wouldn't feel threatened. The little boy, who couldn't be older than 6, stared at Daniel with wide, scared eyes. The younger child, a girl, maybe 3, hid her face in her mother's dress. "My name is Daniel," he said softly. "You're safe here." The woman finally stepped forward. "I am Ayanna," she replied quietly. "These are my children." Daniel noticed the way she held her head high, even though she was clearly exhausted. Every step she took seemed heavy. But she still made sure her children walked before her, as if she would fall 100 times before letting them trip once. A mother's strength was different from any other kind of strength, Daniel thought. He led them inside his modest home. The children looked around with cautious curiosity. Daniel quickly fetched water for them. The boy drank eagerly, and the little girl sipped slowly, her small hands gripping the cup with care. Ayanna refused to drink until her children were finished. Only then did she take a few sips herself. Daniel warmed leftover stew from his lunch. It wasn't much, but Ayanna accepted it as though it were a feast. She shared her portion with her children, even when Daniel told her she didn't need to. Watching them eat stirred something deep inside him, something he hadn't felt in years. Maybe pity, maybe admiration, maybe both. As the children finished their food, they curled up on the blanket Daniel laid out for them near the fireplace. They fell asleep almost instantly, exhausted from the long journey. Ayanna sat near the wall, keeping a careful eye on them. She seemed uneasy in the warm house, as if she wasn't used to comfort anymore. Daniel sat across the room, giving her space. He didn't want her to feel frightened or pressured. After some silence, he finally asked gently, You've been walking far? Ayana nodded. My husband passed some months ago. Since then, everything has become difficult. Our tribe moved on, but I could not keep up. I had the children, and we had very little food left. We followed them as long as we could, but, her voice cracked slightly. She swallowed hard and continued. They did not wait for us. Daniel didn't know what to say at first. He had lived alone by choice. But this woman and her children had been left behind by circumstances far beyond their control. Why come this way? He asked softly. She hesitated before answering. I heard there were ranches here. I hoped someone might help, even for a little while. I didn't expect much. Only a safe place for my children to sleep. Daniel nodded slowly. Her words were simple, but they carried weight. She wasn't asking for anything grand, only the basic kindness any human deserved. You're welcome to stay the night, he said. Ayana lowered her head in gratitude. Thank you. The wind outside whistled softly. And for the first time in years, Daniel felt as though his home wasn't just a building. It felt like a place where life was happening again. He watched the children sleep peacefully. Their tiny faces, relaxed after long fear, brought a warmth to the room that Daniel hadn't realized he was missing. As the night grew deeper, Daniel noticed Ayana trying to stay awake. Her eyes blinked slowly, struggling to remain open. She didn't want to fall asleep in a stranger's house, even after walking for hours. Daniel spoke gently, so he wouldn't startle her. You can rest too, he said. Your children are safe. You're safe. Ayana looked toward her children and then at him. She wanted to believe him. Her eyes softened, and finally, she allowed herself to lie down beside the little ones. She covered them with the blanket and rested her head near theirs. Within minutes, she was asleep. Daniel stayed awake longer, watching over them like a silent guardian. He wasn't sure why he felt responsible for them so quickly, but he did. Maybe it was the way the children clung to their mother, or the way Ayana had stood tall despite her suffering. Maybe it was because he recognized loneliness when he saw it. He remembered the years he had spent alone on this land. The empty evenings, the long, quiet nights. And now, suddenly, there were small breaths filling the air. The soft rustle of children sleeping. The steady presence of someone else in the house. It felt strange, but it felt right too. The next morning, Daniel woke before dawn as usual. When he stepped outside, he saw the sun beginning to rise slowly over the plains, painting the sky with gentle colors. The world looked the same as it always had, yet somehow, everything felt different. He fed his horses, fixed the gate, and walked back toward the house. As he approached the door, he heard something he hadn't heard in a long time. Soft laughter. The children were awake and playing quietly with a piece of twine they had found. Ayana was sitting near them, her eyes brighter than last night, though still tired. When she saw Daniel, she stood quickly. We will leave soon, she said. You have helped us enough. Daniel looked at her and shook his head gently. You don't need to rush. Your children can rest a little more. Ayana seemed surprised by his kindness. Her children clung to her legs, each holding one side of her dress. They didn't want to leave the safety of the house yet. Daniel watched them for a long moment, this little family that had walked into his life without warning. Something inside him shifted again. He didn't know what the future held for them, but he knew one thing with certainty. They didn't deserve to walk back into hardship without at least one more day of peace. And he couldn't turn his back on them. The sun continued to rise, casting warm light across the room, and Daniel felt something he had not felt in years. Hope forming quietly in the middle of his lonely life. Ayana woke before the children, her eyes opening slowly to the soft morning light drifting through the small window. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Her mind still felt trapped in the endless days of walking under the hot sun, searching for a safe place to rest. But when she saw her children curled up on the blanket beside her warm, safe, breathing softly, she remembered Daniel's house and the kindness he had shown them. She sat up quietly, brushing dust from her dress, and whispered a small prayer of thanks under her breath. She didn't want to stay longer than necessary. She didn't want to appear ungrateful or burdensome. She stood slowly, waking her children gently. They rubbed their eyes and clung to her dress, as they always did. Ayanna stroked their hair and told them to prepare to leave. They listened without protest. But their little faces fell with sadness. They had slept peacefully for the first time in many nights, and the thought of walking again frightened them. When Daniel stepped back inside from tending to the horses, he found Ayanna packing the small pouch she carried. The children stood silently beside her, unsure of what to say. Daniel noticed her trembling hands as she tried to tie the pouch shut. "You don't have to leave today," he said calmly, leaning against the wooden frame of the doorway. "Your legs still look tired. Let the children rest." Ayanna looked up quickly. She wanted to refuse. She wanted to say they would not trouble him anymore. But the truth was written on her face. Her body was weak, her feet were swollen, and the children needed time to recover. "We have taken enough from you," she replied softly. "You have a ranch to run. We cannot stay." Daniel shook his head gently. "A day more won't harm anything. Stay and regain your strength." Ayanna hesitated. Her pride resisted, but her children tugged at her dress and leaned into her legs with tired eyes. After a long moment, she finally nodded. "Only one more day," she said. "Thank you." Daniel smiled slightly and began preparing a simple breakfast. The children watched him from the corner of the room. They whispered to each other, pointing at the tools he used, curious about the cowboy who had taken them in. Ayanna tried to help him cook, but Daniel gently motioned for her to sit. She reluctantly sat down, still feeling unsure. She wasn't used to someone doing things for her. For months, every responsibility had fallen on her shoulders. Every meal, every step, every worry. Now, watching someone else prepare food for her children felt strange, almost unreal. After they ate, Daniel stepped outside to repair the broken fence. The children, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly followed him. The young boy walked right behind Daniel, almost stepping on his boots. The little girl held the boy's hand and looked around with wide eyes, fascinated by everything on the ranch, the animals, the tools, the open fields. Daniel noticed them and stopped. "You too curious?" he asked. The boy nodded shyly. Daniel smiled and handed him a small piece of rope. "You want to help?" The boy's face lit up instantly. He held the rope carefully, as though it were something valuable. The girl looked at it too, her eyes bright. Daniel picked up a small stick and handed it to her. "This can be your tool," he said. She smiled shyly and hugged the stick as if it were a treasure. From the window, Ayanna watched them. Her heart softened when she saw her children laughing, something they rarely did anymore. She stepped outside and stood near the porch. She didn't want to interrupt, but she felt drawn to the sight of her children playing again. Daniel tied the rope to the fence post and showed the boy how to pull it tight. The child struggled at first, but Daniel guided him patiently. "Use both hands," he said. "Good. Just like that." The boy tried again, this time pulling with more strength. When he succeeded, he looked up at Daniel with a proud smile. Daniel nodded and patted his head. The girl clapped her hands excitedly and ran in circles around them. Ayanna felt warmth spread through her chest. For a long time, she had feared her children would forget how to smile. This moment felt like a small miracle. Later in the day, Daniel brought out his old pony, gentle, calm, and suited for children. The pony nibbled grass near the barn until Daniel called it over. The children gasped as they saw the animal walking toward them. "Want to touch him?" Daniel asked with a smile. The boy nodded quickly. The girl hesitated before stepping closer. Daniel held the pony's reins steady and lowered its head near the children. They reached out slowly, their small hands brushing the pony's soft fur. The pony snorted lightly, and the children giggled. For a moment, it looked like they had forgotten every hardship they had endured. Ayana walked closer, unable to hide her amazement. She had never seen her children so happy since their father passed. Daniel stepped back a little, giving her space. "They're doing well," he said. Ayana nodded. "You are very kind to them." Daniel shrugged. "Kids deserve kindness." She looked at him with soft eyes. "Many forget that." There was a quiet pause between them. The wind rustled the dry grass. The children ran circles around the pony, laughing and calling to each other in excitement. Daniel watched them as though he enjoyed every second. As the afternoon sun warmed the ranch, Ayana started helping with small chores. She swept the porch, folded blankets, and prepared cornmeal in Daniel's kitchen. She never sat idle, not because she felt forced, but because she believed in giving something back. Daniel noticed this and appreciated her effort. "You don't have to work here," he said gently as she cleaned the table. Ayana looked up. "If we stay, we should help. It is only right." Daniel nodded, respecting her pride. The day passed peacefully, something rare for both of them. As evening approached, Ayana took her children outside to watch the sunset. Daniel was repairing a saddle nearby, and the children wandered toward him again. The boy sat beside Daniel, fascinated by the leather tools. The girl sat on Ayana's lap, resting her head on her mother's shoulder. The boy suddenly asked, "Why do you live here alone?" Daniel paused, surprised by the question. Children spoke without fear. They asked what adults stayed silent about. He answered simply, "I never found a family." The boy frowned. "Why not?" Daniel didn't know how to explain his lonely years. His past was filled with losses he rarely spoke of. "I guess life turned out that way," he said quietly. The little girl looked up at him and asked, "Don't you get sad?" Daniel looked at her soft face and sighed. "Sometimes." The boy then said something that made Ayana freeze. "You can be our papa," he said. "Mama is always sad. She needs someone. And we, like you." Ayana's heart stopped for a moment. She opened her mouth to call out to him, but her voice caught in her throat. She wasn't angry, just overwhelmed. Her children spoke from pure innocence, unaware of the weight of their words. Daniel froze too. He hadn't expected anything like that. He stared at the children, unsure how to reply. Ayana finally found her voice. "Children," she said softly, "do not say such things." But the boy shook his head. "Why not? He is kind." The girl stood up and hugged Daniel's arm gently. "We like him," she whispered. Daniel looked at Ayana. She stood still, her eyes full of worry and embarrassment. She didn't want Daniel to think she had sent her children to beg for anything. She was afraid he might ask them to leave because of this. "I am sorry," Ayana said quickly, stepping forward. "They speak without understanding. Please forgive them." Daniel shook his head gently. "They didn't do anything wrong." Ayana lowered her eyes, unable to hide the emotion rising inside her. She whispered, "We do not wish to trouble you." The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting a cool glow across the land. The air felt heavy with unspoken feelings. Daniel sat quietly for a moment, looking at the children clinging to him. Then he looked at Ayana, tired, strong, hopeful, frightened all at once. He spoke softly. "You and your children are not trouble." Ayana's breath trembled. She turned away before her emotions showed too clearly. She walked a few steps and stood under the fading light, watching the sky darken. Daniel joined her after a few minutes. They didn't speak. They simply shared the silence of two people who understood loneliness too well. Ayana finally whispered, "My children see goodness in you. That is why they said those words. But I do not ask anything of you. You have given us more than we expected." Daniel looked out at the plains. "And what if I don't want you to leave yet?" Ayana's heart beat faster. She didn't answer. She didn't know how. The night settled around them, calm and cool. The children slept peacefully inside the house again, while Ayana sat near the doorway, watching them. Daniel stayed awake longer, thinking about what the children had said, and what Ayana had tried so hard to hide. He realized something simple but powerful. He cared about them more than he had expected, more than he was ready to admit, even to himself. Daniel woke the next morning with a strange feeling in his chest, something warm, something alive, something he had not felt in years. The soft sound of footsteps inside the house reminded him that Ayana and her children were still there. He wasn't used to waking up knowing someone else was under his roof, but somehow, the thought made the house feel less empty. He stepped out of his room and found Ayana grinding corn gently while her children watched her from the floor. When she noticed him, she immediately stopped, as if she wasn't sure whether she was allowed to use his things. Daniel smiled. Lightly. "You can continue," he said. "You don't have to stop on my account." Ayana nodded quietly, but her hands were trembling slightly. The incident from the previous evening when the children asked Daniel to be their father still lingered heavily in her mind. She feared he might see her differently now, or think she had planned it. The boy rushed to Daniel as soon as he entered the room. "Good morning," he said brightly. Daniel patted his head gently. "Morning, kid." The girl peeked from behind Ayana's dress, before moving closer to Daniel. She tugged on his sleeve, wanting him to lift her. He hesitated, unsure if he should, but Ayana gave a small nod that said it was all right. Daniel picked the little girl up carefully, and she rested her head against his shoulder with complete trust. It made something inside him melt. After they had breakfast, Daniel told Ayana he needed to ride into the nearby town for supplies. He didn't usually go unless it was necessary, but he felt the children needed fresh food, milk, bread, fruit, and maybe a few small things to make them smile. Ayana looked uneasy at the thought of him leaving them alone on his ranch. "We can come with you," she said quietly. Daniel shook his head. "The ride is long. The children have walked enough. Stay here and rest. I'll be back before afternoon." Ayana hesitated, but she accepted his words. The truth was that her legs still ached, and the children were not strong enough for another long journey. Daniel saddled his horse and rode off. Ayana watched him disappear across the plains, feeling a strange heaviness in her chest. She didn't want to rely on him, yet she was grateful for every small thing he did. While Daniel was gone, Ayana cleaned the house as best as she could. She swept the floor, folded the blankets neatly, washed the dishes, and organized small things that had been scattered around. It wasn't out of obligation, but out of respect. She didn't want Daniel to feel used or burdened by their presence. Her children played outside with sticks, rocks, and their imagination the only toys they ever knew. They laughed freely, something Ayana cherished more than anything. Seeing them happy here made her wonder if fate had brought them to Daniel's ranch for a reason. When Daniel returned, his horse carried bags filled with fresh supplies. The children ran to him excitedly, and he lifted the boy onto the saddle before dismounting. Ayana watched from the porch, her heart softening. Daniel had gone for supplies many times in his life, but this time, he felt proud like he was returning to a family. Inside, he set the bags on the table. Ayana peeked inside and gasped softly. He had bought more than essentials. There were apples for the children, a small bag of sugar, new cloth for Ayana, and even a tiny wooden horse carved for the boy. I cannot accept all this," she whispered. "You don't have to pay for anything," Daniel said calmly. "But it is too much," she insisted. "You have already given us food, shelter." Daniel interrupted quietly. "You and your children needed these things. That's all." Ayana looked at him. Her eyes filled with gratitude and confusion. She wasn't used to receiving kindness without a price. She didn't understand why he cared so much. The afternoon passed peacefully. Daniel repaired a loose plank on the barn while the children played with their new things. Ayana sewed the cloth Daniel had brought, making simple clothes for the children. She worked with tenderness, occasionally glancing at Daniel when he wasn't looking. As the sun began to lower, Daniel called the children inside for supper. Ayana helped him prepare the meal, and for a brief moment, it felt as if they had been doing this together for years. Their movements fit naturally, passing bowls, stirring pots, sharing small smiles. After supper, the children were full of energy again. They followed Daniel outside and asked him to show them more about the ranch. He showed them how to feed the chickens, how to hold a rope properly, and even how to spot which clouds meant rain. Ayana stood near the doorway, watching quietly, her heart both heavy and hopeful. As twilight grew stronger, Daniel sat on the porch, fixing a lantern. The boy sat beside him, watching closely. The girl lay near Ayana's lap, tired but content. Then, in the silence of the evening, Ayana walked toward Daniel with slow, careful steps. She stopped a few feet away, gathering courage. Her voice was soft when she finally spoke. "I wish to talk to you." Daniel looked up, sensing the seriousness in her tone. He nodded and set the lantern aside. The children were half asleep now, wrapped in blankets near the door. Ayana stepped closer, her hands trembling as she held them together. "Yesterday, what the children said. I am sorry." They spoke without understanding the weight of their words. Daniel's eyes softened. "You don't need to apologize." Ayana shook her head. "I do. Because their words hold truth. They are lonely. They miss having someone who cares for them as their father once did. But I would never ask you to become something you do not wish to be." 1. Daniel felt a warmth building in his chest. "Ayana, your children said what they felt. Children see things simply." Ayana looked away, unable to meet his eyes. "They see your kindness. And they hold on to hope because of it. But I do not want to force you into responsibility, or make you feel we are trying to claim your life." She paused, took a deep breath, and continued quietly. "We cannot stay here without a proper bond. People talk. Your neighbors may misunderstand. My tribe may see things in the wrong way if they ever find out. I want my children to have safety. I want them to have a home, and I want to keep my honor as a widow." Daniel listened carefully. He could see the struggle inside her, the fear of being rejected, the fear of being judged, the fear of losing the only safe place she had found. Ayana's voice grew even softer. "I do not ask for charity. I do not ask for a quick promise. I only wish, if you believe it could be right, that you consider allowing us to stay as more than guests." Daniel's breath caught in his throat. He had not expected her to speak so openly. She wasn't begging, she was offering him a choice, with all the dignity she had left. She lowered her head and finished her words. "If you do not wish it, we will leave in the morning. I will not trouble you again." The weight of her words landed on Daniel like a hammer. Leave in the morning. The thought pierced him unexpectedly. He imagined the house quiet again, the rooms empty, the nights silent. He imagined Ayana and her children walking back into danger, with no one to protect them, no one to give them a home. He knew instantly that he didn't want that. But still, he needed to be certain not for himself, but for them. He didn't want to offer a promise he couldn't keep. "Ayana," he said quietly, "I need time. Not because I doubt you, but because I want to make the right decision for you, for the children, for me." Ayana looked up, her eyes filled with both hope and fear. "I just need one night," Daniel said gently. Ayana nodded slowly. Her heart beat wildly, but she forced herself to stay calm. She whispered a soft thank you and gathered her children, who had fallen asleep on the porch. She carried them inside, and Daniel stayed outside long after the sky turned completely dark. He sat on the porch, staring at the stars, thinking about everything he had lost in his life and everything he might gain now. For years, He had convinced himself he wasn't meant for family or love. But Ayana and her children had brought life into his world without even trying. He thought about the boy laughing while holding the rope, the little girl hugging his arm, Ayana standing strong despite her struggles, the warmth they brought to his quiet house. As he sat there, the truth became clearer and clearer. He didn't want them to leave. Not tomorrow. Not ever. He wasn't afraid of responsibility. He was afraid of losing them. And by the time he finally stood to go inside, Daniel knew that his answer tomorrow morning would change all of their lives forever. Daniel barely slept through the night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the same images: the children laughing on his ranch, Ayana sweeping the porch with quiet grace, the way her eyes glimmered with hope even when she tried to hide it. He remembered the boy's innocent question, the girl's small arms around his neck, and Ayana's trembling voice asking him to think about allowing them to stay. He lay awake, listening to the soft breathing of three people who had changed his life without even trying. The house no longer felt like walls and furniture, it felt alive. Every sound was warmer because it belonged to them. When the first light of dawn touched the windows, Daniel got up. He stood outside for a long moment, letting the cool morning air fill his chest. The sun was still low, but the world already glowed with color, soft gold spreading across the plains, painting everything with a promise of something new. Today was the day he would give his answer. Inside the house, Ayana was awake too. She had barely slept. She sat beside her children, who were stirring softly under the blankets. Her heart beat quickly as she thought about Daniel's words the night before. She didn't want to pressure him. She didn't want him to feel forced. But she also knew that without his protection, her life and her children's would return to fear and struggle. She whispered a small prayer, asking for strength no matter what his answer would be. When the children finally woke up, they immediately asked where Daniel was. "Is he outside?" the boy asked. Ayana smiled weakly. "Yes. Let him have a little quiet." The children didn't understand why their mother looked worried, but they sensed something important was happening. Ayana stepped outside when the sun rose fully. She spotted Daniel standing near the corral, gazing out at the horizon. The wind moved gently through his hair, and he looked deep in thought. She walked slowly toward him, her steps careful and quiet. Daniel turned when he heard her. Their eyes met, and for a brief moment, neither spoke. Ayana searched his face for any hint of what he was about to say. She saw seriousness there, but also warmth. She felt her breath catch in her throat. "You've been thinking," she whispered. Daniel nodded. All night, Ayana looked down, bracing herself. "Whatever your decision is, I will accept it. We will leave with respect." Ayana won. Ayana looked down. "We will leave with respect." Daniel shook his head softly. "Ayana," he said, his voice steady, "I don't want you to leave." Her eyes widened slightly, unsure if she heard correctly. "You don't?" "No," he answered slowly. "I don't." Ayana's lips parted in surprise. For a long moment, she couldn't speak. She had prepared herself for rejection, for another long journey, for more struggle. She had prepared herself to be strong in front of her children. But she had not prepared her heart for yes. Daniel stepped closer, not too close, just enough to make his words clear. "I thought about what you said," he continued, "and about your children, and about me. This house felt empty for years. I got used to the silence. But when you came here, when your children laughed, when I saw you standing in this home, I realized something." Ayana waited, her hands trembling softly. "I don't want to live alone anymore," he said gently. "I don't want you to walk away into danger, and I don't want your children to grow up without someone to protect them." Ayana's eyes filled with tears, but she held them back, listening closely. He took a deeper breath. "You asked if I would let you stay as more than guests. You were asking for honor, safety, a future. But what you didn't know is that I want that too. Ayana pressed a hand softly against her chest. Daniel. He looked directly into her eyes, steady and sincere. Ayana, I would like you to be my wife. Not because you need a home, not because your children need a father, but because I choose you. And I choose them, if you will have me. Ayana gasped softly. Tears streamed down her cheeks before she could stop them. She covered her mouth with both hands, overwhelmed by the weight of those words. She had expected kindness from Daniel, but she never imagined he would offer them a real place. His home, his protection, his name, his future. She stepped closer, tears shimmering. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I will have you, and I will honor you with my whole heart. Daniel let out a slow breath of relief. For a moment, the world felt quiet, soft wind, warm sun, and two people who had finally found what they had been missing. The children woke and wandered outside moments later. They ran straight to Daniel, hugging his legs as if they had always belonged there. When Ayana told them softly that Daniel wished to become their father, the boy's face broke into a bright smile. Really? He shouted with excitement. The girl hugged Daniel's neck tightly, giggling with pure joy. Daniel lifted them both, holding them as if they were already his. That morning, the house felt filled with light. Ayana prepared breakfast with a happiness she hadn't felt in years. Daniel helped the children wash and get ready for the day. Every movement felt like a family settling into a new rhythm. Word spread quickly when Daniel rode into town to tell his closest neighbor, an older man named Harris, about the upcoming marriage. Harris raised his eyebrows in surprise, but broke into a wide smile. Well, I didn't think I'd see the day. Harris laughed. About time someone filled that lonely house of yours. Daniel smiled shyly but felt proud. Harris offered to gather a few others to help with a simple wedding ceremony on Daniel's ranch. Nothing fancy, just a small gathering of friendly faces willing to witness a new beginning. Within 2 days, preparations were made. Neighboring families brought fresh bread, blankets, jars of honey, and small gifts for Ayana and the children. The women helped Ayana brush her hair and fix her dress. The children were cleaned and dressed in the new clothes Ayana had sewn from the fabric Daniel had bought. Daniel wore his best shirt, old but clean. He stood tall, more confident than he had been in years. The ceremony took place under the open sky, with the wind warm and gentle. The neighbors gathered in a semicircle as Daniel and Ayana stood before them. Ayana held her children close, their small hands gripping her dress. Harris spoke simple words about unity, kindness, and starting anew. There were no grand speeches, no fancy decorations, just sincerity and the open plains around them. When Daniel took Ayana's hands, she trembled. Her eyes were full of tears. But they weren't tears of sorrow. They were tears of relief, gratitude, and hope. I promise to protect you and your children, Daniel said softly. I promise to build a life with you, day by day. Ayana wiped her tears gently and answered, I promise to stand with you in every season. You gave us a home when we had nothing. And now, I give you my heart. The neighbors cheered softly. The children hugged Daniel tightly, calling him Papa without hesitation. The small ranch felt new again. After the ceremony, everyone shared food, laughter, and warmth. The children played with the other kids, running through the fields with joy. Daniel and Ayana stood side by side, watching them, feeling like everything had fallen into place exactly as it was meant to. As evening came, the guests left one by one, offering blessings and warm smiles. When the last neighbor rode away, Daniel and Ayana stood alone in the quiet yard, the glow of sunset surrounding them. Ayana looked at Daniel with gentle eyes. You have changed our lives, she whispered. Daniel shook his head and pulled her softly into his arms. No, he said. You all changed mine. Inside the house, the children were already curled up under blankets, safe and peaceful. Daniel and Ayana looked at them, and then at each other, knowing their journey was just beginning. The lonely cowboy was no longer lonely. The poor widow was no longer lost. The children were no longer afraid. They had become a family not by blood, not by force, but by choice, and by love, born from kindness. And from that day on, the ranch was never silent again. It was filled with laughter, hope, footsteps, and the soft voices of people who had finally found their home.